Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School Pregame Show. My name is Andrew Claudio, a.k.a. GMAC, and it is time to preview another Knicks matchup, this time on Saturday night against the Detroit Pistons. The Knicks have only played the Pistons once this year. And I know a lot of you from our conversations outside of that game have heard us talk glowingly about the Pistons, how much improved they are this season. Unfortunately, we did not get that version of the Pistons when the Knicks played them that night, as it seemed like that was the first time the Knicks showcased their high-powered offense. But that was more than a month ago, and the Pistons are 9-15 on the season. They are on a 3-game losing streak, but they've obviously played much better than they did last year, that's for sure. This is a team that added some free agents, has seen a leap from Cade Cunningham, potential leap from Jaden Ivey as well. And we're going to talk all about them before the Knicks play against them tonight. And joining me from the Detroit Free Press, as well as the Pistons Pulse podcast, Mr. Omari Sankofa. Omari, thank you so much for joining me today on the Knicks Film School pregame show.
Yeah, Andrew, thanks for having me. Really happy to be back on here, I believe, for the second time.
Yes, sir.
And as you mentioned, the team's in a much different spot than they were a year ago.
Yeah.
Which I think lends to some conversation, maybe.
Yeah, so it's funny. The best part of our conversation last year was when I was trying to be optimistic about you're gonna have a high draft pick, and they hadn't won a game in like a month and a half at the time. So it was like you made that point. It's like, what am I optimistic about? Like, they haven't won a game in a month and a half. And while 9-15 isn't the poster, or like you don't put that on a poster and say like progress, it is compared to last year. They didn't win their 9th game until I believe it was February last year. So it is progress, but you tell me. We like to start this with the state of the union. So the state of the Pistons in your case, to the Knicks fan that is mostly just box score watching and hasn't had a chance to watch the Pistons, how much of an improved just season has it been over last year?
It's been very improved. You mentioned it. They did not win their 9th game. I was tracking it up until like their 5th or 6th win, and then it was just like, okay, like I could do this all season. But it was sometime in February or like early March when they got win 9 last year.
Right.
And obviously last year, for those who may not remember, the Pistons had a franchise worst 14-win season, which included a franchise worst, I actually think NBA worst. There were so many records last season that they were just like kind of swimming in my head, and now when I try to recall them, like they become a little fuzzy. The 28-game losing streak was historic on a few different levels. I think we were in the midst of that when we did the pod last year. They started off 3-29, so like they were 2-1, and then they lost 28 straight, and then they beat the Toronto Raptors like right before New Year's.
And just to jump in, you're welcome, because the reason they beat the Raptors that night is because that morning the Raptors made a trade with the New York Knicks, shorthanding their roster. So that way, no Anunoby, I guess no Malachi Flynn, no Precious Achiuwa. How much does that actually matter? But they were in the midst.
Margins matter,
I was about to say they were in the midst of a pretty shell-shocked morning. I'll say, at least that weekend.
So I don't know, I don't know if you send the Knicks a gift basket for that, but
we'll
certainly
we'll take it.
It certainly helps snap that downward spiral. So so long story short, last season was like as bad as it could get, especially for a team that was in year 3 or 4 of what was a full rebuild, and you have a new coach. You're expected to take this stuff forward, and things kind of go off the rails, like essentially right off the jump. To start 3-29 is just it's kind of surreal in hindsight. So now this season you have JB Bickerstaff, you have some vets, Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr., Malik Beasley, Paul Reed, Cade, I think has been better. You mentioned it, Jaden Ivey's been better. They're a bit deeper, and they have more wins. They're 9-15. They were actually 7-8 at one point, and they've kind of hit a skid. They've lost 5 of their last 7. And but even in that, you look at a team that's on pace to, essentially win between 30 and 34 games through the first, quarter-ish of the season. And you credit Cade Cunningham for that. I think he has been overall, much closer to the player that they believed they were getting when they took him first overall. Coaching helps. Just a lot of small things, I think, that have added up and kind of helped this thing get above ground level, at least I would say.
So You just said coaching helps. And I actually want to talk about JB Bickerstaff for a second, because obviously what's going on with his old team can be looked at as an indictment on him. And I just don't think it's that simple of an explanation. You know, that team was really bit by injuries last year. The Cavaliers were. I mean, I actually thought getting 49 wins, regardless of the tankery that was involved on the last day of the season to guarantee a matchup against the Magic. I thought they survived that season more than anything in Cleveland, and obviously they're off to a 20-3 start after they switched coaches. But I think that the same conversation can be said about the improvement he's brought to the Pistons, just from the outsider's perspective, and just how they seem to have a direction now, especially compared to what Monty Williams was a year before. If you could speak to, for those of us who haven't had the perspective you've had of the Pistons, like just what's different, whether it be on the court or off the court, under JB Bickerstaff?
Yeah, I think JB's come in and he's just really brought like a voice and an energy that I think when you're a young team figuring things out, to have a coach who is just extremely deeply emotionally invested, right? Like, he's gonna take a tech for you on the sideline if he disagrees with a call. Just his voice and practice on the sideline. I think just energy. I think this franchise was in a position where it just needed a spark of energy, some organization, some, passion, and just some know-how, obviously. And JB took over midway through the season in Cleveland. And that season wasn't as bad as the Pistons were last year, but it wasn't that much better. You're kind of going through a crisis midway through, and you switch some things up, and JB essentially inherits a bit of a mess. And you look at their improvement over that span, and they became a contender essentially. You mentioned the injuries that they had, but like last year's team was the best Cleveland team since they had LeBron James, right?
Yeah.
And JB, you look at the player development they had with Evan Mobley and Darius Garland and Jared Allen. I think he came in and really gave them an organization and verve on defense that you saw improve from year to year. And you're just seeing a lot of that sort of recreated with the Pistons now. They got off to like a really strong defensive start. That's kind of slipped, but even so, they've been a different team on that end of the floor compared to the last 5 years. And so much of just getting to ground level was just at least being organized defensively. And yeah, I think just his energy, his passion has just kind of brought life into something that this time last season just seemed pretty bleak.
Well, you mentioned their defensive improvement. I'll say this as a Knicks fan and someone who's watched every second of this team this year, the defense has needed improving for most of the year. We've seen an uptick over the last week or so. They've just been better. Just hitting the do better button helps. They've not necessarily switched up their scheme significantly. They're doing a little bit. They are still playing some drop coverage, especially when Karl Anthony Towns is on the floor, but they're being more aggressive with their help. They're just the Mikal Bridges of it all. I think is the biggest thing, is that he's not as bad as he was the first 14 or so games of the season. And the goal for Knicks fans has been like have the best offense in the league, which they do, and try to get up to 15th in defense, which coincidentally is where the Pistons sit right now, 15th in defensive rating, according to NBA.com. So the Knicks can actually, in their mission to get to 15th, help their mission, help that cause, I should say, by putting up a big number on the Pistons in this game. So let's talk about this matchup for a little bit. I only have one game of data, and it was that Friday night in Detroit where the Knicks kind of got out to an early lead and then went and hid for the next 3 quarters. When it's looked the best this year, when the Pistons have looked like they're going to give a game to somebody, what does it look like? What can the Knicks expect on the defensive end?
Yeah, I think one, just that energy and organization on defense. So they've been, like you mentioned, they're 15th in defensive rating, which makes sense because, I looked up the numbers before I hopped on. They were ranked 6th in defensive rating through November 17th. And November 17th is when they defeated the Washington Wizards on the road to improve to 7-8 overall. So, you're 15 games to the season, you're a game within 500. And since then, I think they're 2-7.
Yeah,
and And a few things have happened in there. The day after they beat the Wizards, they came home and the Chicago Bulls knocked down 23 3-pointers and beat them. And that's a lot of threes to give up. Obviously, I think that was
That's the Bulls too. Is they're just
yeah.
firing away right now.
And they're just firing away. And then I think they went back on the road to Charlotte, and Charlotte put up a good fight. And Cade hurt his tailbone. It was a specific muscle in his tailbone that he sprained. I couldn't tell you. It was a very medical term, but essentially he had a tailbone injury that cost him a few games. And I think it really highlighted just how much Cade's given his team defensively this season. Just him being a guy who's 6'6", 7-foot wingspan, knows what every team's trying to do. He's absolutely been an engine for them, and him missing those 3 games, I think you could see that there was a void on the perimeter. And then of course they played Milwaukee, I believe, twice in that span, and they played the Celtics this week. So you fall from 6th, and then they've been 24th, essentially since they were 7 and 8. So you've gone from like top 6 to bottom 7. But Cade's back, and I think if you get back to where you were before, even if you just stay around average this season, that's still like a big improvement compared to where they were, where they have been perennially bottom 7, I think, for the previous 4 seasons before that. So just players stepping up. I think Cade's been big on that end. Isaiah Stewart's been big on that end. You've seen better effort from guys like Jaden Ivey and Marcus Sasser, and they just got to start Thompson back too. I think he's questionable tonight, but he was their best perimeter guy last season. So JB's up with that, and then guys stepping up too.
Same starting 5: Jalen Duren, Tobias Harris, once a Nick, always a Nick, Tim Hardaway Jr., Cade Cunningham, Jade Ivey. And then Malik Beasley off the bench this year, going through their numbers on cleaning the glass. He currently has their best on-off. I mean, if you could just speak to what you've seen from, just those top 6, like the starting 5. I'll look up their lineup data in a second, but like Malik Beasley killed the Knicks last year. In every game the Knicks played against the Bucks, it felt like, oh, this is the game Malik Beasley's going to hit 5 threes this season. So that starting 5 that I just mentioned has a -6, -7 net rating. But when you put in a beef stew in for Jalen Duren, it goes to +7. It's only 135 possessions, so you can't take too much of it. But I guess if you want to speak, there's a question here: who's been sneaky good? I guess from Ben Kim Gervey, what is Detroit sneakily good at? I'm more who's the role player that's going to go off against the Knicks today? That Knicks fans are going to be like, I didn't prepare for this. I thought Cade or Jaden Ivey were going to kill us today. Like, who can Knicks fans expect might go off today?
Yeah, I would actually go with Malik Beasley. I think for a Pistons team that has not shot the ball, very well again through this kind of period, they've had, but they've been in rebuild mode. They have not really had the type of shooters where, it's like you have, like, you cannot give them space at all. Like, you have to just be glued to this guy, or like even with a hand in his face, like he's still going to knock down threes. I haven't had a lot of those guys. Especially, players who have kind of been battle tested, like Malik Beasley's been in the playoffs. And like, he's come in and like, I think just on and off the court, like he's really like folded into this team. Like, he's been the vet that's like really, I think, brought a lot of like know-how, but also just being there for the guys, being almost like a big brother for the guys in some ways. I think he's really embraced that. But again, I think everybody's seen what he can do when he heats up at this point, and he's essentially just been hot all season. Like, he's shooting like 40% from threes, averaging almost 16 points a game off the bench. And you see when he checks in, like, it just adds a different dynamic to their offense, where I think their offense could get bogged down because Cade, even now, starts to create so much just because they don't really have another playmaker who commands that type of attention. But having a guy, Malik Beasley, who can knock down 3 threes in a couple minutes and just completely change the complexion of a game, makes Cade's life a lot easier. I think it makes everybody's life a lot easier, right? So he could come in tonight, like, you blink, and he's had 12 points in the last 8 minutes, and it was a 13-point game, and now it's 5. And there's been a lot of moments like that this season, and I think Malik Beasley could be that guy again tonight.
Adding a veteran, even if it's like of the caliber of like Paul Reed or Malik Beasley or Tobias Harris or Tim Hardaway Jr., it doesn't have to be significant veteran presence. It just has to be a veteran presence to a young team. It just means so much. Like, I know last year it was like Bogey was there, but he was clearly on the way out. And you had Alec Burks just trying to get his bucket so he can get to a new team. And then obviously Fournier went there trying to reclaim a spot in an NBA rotation. So that seemed rudderless isn't the right word, but just like a young team lacking some veteran presence on the court. And I'm always reminded, I don't know if you read Jake Fisher's book about tanking. I know there's multiple books about tanking out there, between Jerome Weitzman and Jake Fisher, but the story he tells about the process Sixers, that the year that Jahlil Okafor got drafted and that video came out of the altercation like outside of a nightclub, and Krzyzewski saw the video, and like right after his like star power forward got drafted to this team, he's suddenly like his career's off to this start, and he called the league to be like, what? I know that what they're trying to do is lose, but they're setting up these young guys for failure. Yeah. And immediately the Sixers traded for Ish Smith, not like a future Hall of Famer. This isn't like Chris Paul on the Spurs. It was just a veteran, like an adult in the room. And that's what I get the few times I've had the chance to watch the Pistons this year, is like, oh, there's a presence here. Like there's a clear organization that doesn't put all the pressure on the young guys coming in, and allows them to just kind of progress slowly. But it also seems to have helped Cade this season, averaging 23, 7, and 9 this year. I think he has a chance to be an all-star this season. And before we get to some Knicks talk, I'm curious how you measure progress this year. Is it based, like, if Cade makes the all-star team, is the rest gravy? Do you care about the play-in race potentially? Like, what would a successful, or even to the inverse, a disappointing season look like for you?
I think it's tough because this rebuild is in a weird spot where it's been going on long enough that, I think, the fan base will, the Pistons haven't won a playoff game and, like however long. So the patience, I think, for a lot of people has already been thin enough to where it's like, yeah, like I know this and that and whatever happened, but look at how long it's been, right? Like at some point you just have to rip the Band-Aid off and make some moves and go try to win, right? And I think that's sort of the perpetual issue with all teams who are rebuilding or in the middle or whatever deal with, is like, how do you kind of toe that line between, we're rebuilding and we're, trying to stockpile young players and assets and get better, but also, at some point you have to put a product on the floor that conveys that this is a professional basketball team, right? So I think if the Pistons maintain their current pace, like, whether or not that ended in a playoff spot, if you hit that 30-win threshold after winning 14, and you're like, we won twice as many games in the first year under a new coach, Cade, whether he makes All-Star or not, like right now he's giving you, essentially 24, 9 and 7, like you said, on like 45, 38, like, 78 split. So his free throws are a bit down right now. He's normally around 85, but that's like an all-star player. Like, that's a guy that you can build around regardless of, the all-star berth, because in today's NBA, there's just so many good guys that there's really not enough all-star or all-NBA roster spots to accommodate all the guys who are deserving. So I feel like I talk about that a lot. I'm like, like there's always going to be snubs just because there's not enough spots. Like the NBA is in a spot where you just don't have enough. But if Cade maintains that level, you're at 30 wins. Like, I think that's like the medium point of like everybody's at least somewhat satisfied. Like, if you wanted them to be better, at least it's like they got better. If you wanted them to be bad, it's like, okay, you're still in the lottery mix. So you still have a chance at Cooper Flag and whoever else. So I think that's sort of the happy medium if you hit that 30-win threshold.
So that's really good perspective there, because I think, like you mentioned the drought, which I keep forgetting that it's game 4 of the 2008 conference finals is the last Pistons playoff win. And
like, I have to remind myself that some of the people I see in my mentions on Twitter or X, whatever it is, like, are people who have not been alive for a Pistons championship, and they were probably too young to remember the last playoff win.
Win. Yeah. There's a 15-year-old out there that's never seen in their lifetime a Pistons playoff win. I'm not trying to rub that in either.
No, for sure. But you just have no like, framework for like what that looks like, So
so I don't know how old you are, but so I'm 36 and
okay. I'm 30.
Okay, so I'm sure you remember game 4. Like, you remember watching it.
Yeah.
I remember watching it, and never in a million years like to look back on history and something happens with context and with time. Yeah. Where you're like, oh, wow, I remember watching that game. And that's the last time the Pistons, like, I remember watching it was either on TNT or I think the East that year was on ABC. And I remember like, oh yeah, we're going back to Sports Center to recap the game. It's like, oh, it's a good win by the Pistons, tied up the
Yeah.
series. Wonder if the Celtics in this Big Three era that they've put themselves in trouble against a team that's made the conference finals for the 6th straight year.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting to look back that way. But I'm sure as a Pistons fan, there can be some desperation. But to your point, progress from Cade, have him in the All-Star conversation. You win 30 games, that's more than double your win total from the year before, and you're clearly trending in the right direction, and they're also in a conference where you win 30 games, you might get the 10 seed, so you could still be in the lottery.
I'm still surprised at how bad the East is. It's like,
it's
wow.
so bad. Yeah. Like I was having a conversation yesterday. Our Patreon podcast is where we talk about the league at large, and I just, full disclosure, as a New Yorker, I like to laugh at Philadelphia every chance that we get. Our baseball team and our basketball team has eliminated them in the last 2 seasons, 2 playoffs. They're off to this, but now 6-15 start, which you'd like to make fun of and like to laugh at, and they're like a game and a half in the loss column out of the 8th seed right now. So it's so tough to do that. I think that the interesting thing from a Knicks perspective is like that first year under Tibbs, they were projected to win 21 games according to Vegas, and then they won 41, and they took a step back the year after with Kemba Walker, and then Jalen Brunson came, and the rest is kind of history. It just how far you can be away, like thinking back to that We Here season to then project 5 years later. It's like, oh, Karl Anthony Towns, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, and Josh Hart are here. It could be a while and require some patience. If I can get your perspective on what the Knicks did this offseason and where that puts them in the contender conversation. Last year, 2 very competitive games between the Pistons and the Knicks at the Garden. I'm not saying tonight won't be competitive. I'm actually like very curious to see what the Pistons look like and if they bring a game to the Knicks. But they've had a habit so far this year of getting off to like these really good starts. So you tell me your reaction to the 2 blockbuster trades that they made this offseason.
Yeah, like I feel like they've like been really smart and intentional about how they've kind of gone about this. And one thing that's interesting about, I think the Knicks' path to this point is that they kind of did it through the draft, but at the same time, you bring in guys like Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson, who these are like above average basketball players, right? They're younger guys. They have, I guess a quote unquote untapped ceiling, but but when you have a guy come in at 24, 25, 26, like a lot of times they kind of are who they are, right? And Randall kind of gets to like this borderline MVP season level, and then Brunson obviously we know how good he's become. So it's just interesting to me that they kind of just found guys who just kind of happened to just find the right environment and kind of hit that level, and then you can augment them obviously the way they have of shooters. And so long story short, I think the Mikal Bridges trade, like 5 first-round picks is a lot, but overall, like when you're at that level, like I think picks are only as valuable as how much they kind of help you now, because your window's only so open. Like I was probably one of the few people who immediately thought the Rudy Gobert trade was like a logical trade, because it's like, what are those draft picks going to do for them? Like you're just going to draft between 20 and 30 every year and hope you get like a role, like it doesn't make sense. Like,
right.
Like, and you can always get draft picks back if you have good players, like they picks come and go once you reach a certain level of, we have assets we can trade and we have picks that we kind of need to burn. And I just kind of feel like the Knicks were in that spot where it's like, we have something here, we haven't had anything in a while, so let's just go out and see what we can get. So you get Mikal Bridges, like, you need wing defenders to match up against, Philly and, against Boston. So, I thought that made sense. It's 5 first-round picks, and Mikal's not an all-star guy, but like, okay, like you can get those picks back. And then Randall for Karl Anthony Towns. And I like Dante DiVincenzo a lot, but like whatever you get, again, you get the best player in a deal, and I kind of use the same logic. Not that this trade needed defending like the Rudy Gobert trade did, but it's like you got the best player in the deal. Like the immediate value, clearly is pretty sky high. And again, I thought that was a no-brainer deal to go get, like a top 3 or 4 offensive big in the NBA. And, it seems like they're clicking now. And I just like the way that they've done this whole rebuild pretty much from start to finish. It's been very savvy, and I feel like they've done a good job of kind of weighing their assets correctly.
Well, I mean, we really saw them that play out over the last real calendar year, including a
Yeah.
trade with Detroit. Like
Yeah.
I remember someone texting me after they made the trade with Detroit last year, where it was Grimes and Malachi Flynn. I have to add him because he scored 50 points a week later, and I was like, what happened? And then I had someone text me right after the trade for Burks and Bogey that like the Knicks have made the two biggest trades in the NBA in the last 2 months, and they haven't traded a first. And then they trade all the firsts, it seems like, for Mikal. And they had this Detroit first that is obviously protected for the next couple of years that went out to Minnesota for Cat. It's been impressive to see like a well-run Knicks team, like a smart-run Knicks team, where they stockpiled for a while and then cashed in when they had the chance to. If you don't mind, I'd like to go to our chat from people watching live before you get out of here to get some questions. First, we'll start with Juanan. Juanan, thank you so much for tuning in. Salute GMAC and Omari. Is there a target or targets in trade to improve this team and give Cade real help? The Harris contract was signed to be traded. Pretty sure Beef Stews is the same. #fire tips.
Yeah, so you look at a guy and like Tobias Harris, he signed a 2-year deal. Tobias is a guy, like, he is who he is, like, he's a good scorer. He's going to give you some rebounding, some stability. So that's a tradable deal. Bleak Beasley, THJ are both on expiring contracts. So you have some opportunities there to get either long-term value if you feel like you're missing the playoffs, or maybe go get a guy, if you're trying to, chase the play-in or playoffs, and, you're still winning pretty well. So I think when you have a guy in Trajan Langdon who has still not really had that moment to kind of shape this roster and kind of how he views a modern NBA roster should look like, he came in and really inherited a situation that had been there before, and he added vets, and then he drafted Ron Holland and Bobby Klintman. But, most of this roster is still the last regime's roster. So I actually think this trade deadline will be very telling as far as what the priority is as far as that. And I think a lot of that just comes down to, which Pistons team they are around that time. Like, are they closer to the 6th defensive rating? And it's like, okay, maybe we're what Indiana was last year and we go get a Pascal Siakam, or, do you just look at the fact that you still owe a first-round pick after all this? And it's like, maybe we just go get some assets and take another dip into the lottery and see where we are next year. So I think that's very much a TBD, and it just kind of comes down to where they are once you get into January and February.
Bit of a follow-up on that from Ben Kim Gervey. A Kevin Danishevsky pre-memorial question. I'll explain what that is in a second.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on Simone Fontecchio, and is he part of the team's future plans? One of our longtime most devoted patrons is named Kevin Danishevsky. He is a comment in here we'll go to in a second, but the king of the fake trade. Like, can we do X, and X for X? And I have to call him the king of it because 4 years he said trade all the picks for Mikal Bridges. And we were like, Knicks and Nets haven't made a trade since 1983. New York. That's just not going to happen in the same market. And lo and behold, I was on a Zoom call on Patreon when that happened. And I got to see his face when we all realized, oh my gosh, Kevin was right. Not we got Mikal Bridges. It was Kevin was right. So we'll get to Kevin in a second. But as far as Fontecchio is concerned, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, he's an interesting guy. So he was, in his second year in Utah last season, and shooting the three pretty well, 6'8". Like, he gives you size on defense, some rebounding. Pistons traded for him at the deadline, and he came in, and it was the Pistons did so much at the deadline because they had to shake things up that he essentially joined a team that was just a completely different team from the one that was there previously. And he played well, like, came off the bench, like, averaged double figures, shot the ball well. Like, he was a genuinely solid player for them down the stretch in a season where they just didn't have a lot of genuinely solid guys. So coming to the offseason with a new regime, and he only signed a 1-year deal, which obviously opens the door for him to, leave pretty quickly because you can't extend that or anything. He's going to, go back into the market. But he's also kind of struggled this year a bit. His efficiency hasn't been where it's been. He had toe surgery over the offseason, and, I think there's probably been some recovery, for him as far as that. You rehab the offseason, and then you come in and you got to get your win back and everything. I think he's kind of been trying to find his legs and his win, essentially. So he has not had the season that he had for him last year yet. There's still a lot of year to play out. Well, we've seen what he can do in Utah and last season, and he's a really solid rotation wing. I mean, you always need guys who can knock down 38% from three and not be negatives on defense. And I think he's a guy that should be part of the future plans if that percentage could tick back up. But again, he's only on the 1 year deal, and those numbers haven't been there so far. So I think we have to see how the rest of this year plays out, and if he's the guy that becomes a priority next offseason once we'll have some more money to spend, and we'll have to prioritize some guys on their own roster.
Next question comes from Alan. Thank you, Alan, for your question. Which young players do you feel most confident about as part of being the core of the team for the next few years?
So that's an interesting question because, again, we have a new GM coming, like Trajan has, and there's like no track record, as far as how they typically operate in these types of environments. Like I feel pretty confident about Cade Cunningham. The reality is that for this rebuild to really take off, they're going to need a second Cade Cunningham equivalent player. Like that's just how it is in today's league.
This draft is supposed to have a couple.
So they need two Cades. You have one Cade. You need a second Cade if you really want to make some noise in any capacity in this league. And so far, none of their other young guys have become that type of player. Isaiah Stewart has been one of their top defenders. He's a great rotation big man. He's also on a pretty good deal. He's making 15 a year, 16 with incentives. Solid rotation big, can shoot the three a little bit. Like that's a deal that's always going to have value, right? You have guys in Jaden Ivey and Duran who are extension eligible next season. They're 2 years away from having to make firmer decisions on those guys, and they've been good, but they haven't impacted winning yet. Asar Thompson, he has some health issues. He's come back again, like great defender, can handle the ball. See a guy that you could build around, to see a role player, like you don't know yet. So there's a lot of players who are sort of in that gray zone of, are these guys we should commit to or not? And I think because of that, you have a new GM. Like I really only feel confident about Cade Cunningham. I think he's the only guy at this point who has really shown that he's somebody you should prioritize and build around. And obviously they already signed him to that max deal. So, he's going to be here for a bit more than likely. Beyond that, like everybody else is either on a pretty good deal that could be traded, like Isaiah, or they're young guys who have not really shown that whatever extension that they're due for, like there's still a process that has to unfold. So outside of Cade, like honestly, I think I'm very curious to see how things play out over that next year because Trajan's got some big decisions to make coming up.
Cade and Ivy, or just Cade?
Just Cade.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
Just Cade. Because J.I. has been really good this season. I think he's a guy that you can build around. There's a lack of playmaking on this team that I think has hurt them. And so far, J.I. has not been like that level of playmaker. So I guess you look at long term, like if you evaluate that fit, I don't know where that falls. I'm not saying that they're going to trade J.I. or that's even likely. It's just typically in a rebuild like this, you prioritize the Cades, and you wait to see how J.I. turns out. So that's why right now I just really only feel the most comfortable about Cade.
Two more questions, or one comment, one question. One's for me and one's for you. The infamous Kevin Danishevsky, AC, you missed Marcus Morris in trivia, 1-5-20 versus LAC. Thank you, Kevin, for submitting something that has nothing to do with the pregame pod or the Knicks or the Pistons. I appreciate that. We did a trivia segment with one of our sponsors that we released this morning. And the trivia was, I technically did say this decade, but it's like the Knicks, their 14 players had scored at least 30 points in a game, at least once. There's 14 different players that have scored 30 in a game for the Knicks this decade, and they were taking turns guessing. I did clarify post-pandemic. It starts with the 2021 season. So that's where I sorted from. So while Kevin is technically right, he also didn't listen to instructions when it was read. Okay, Kevin, love you. But once again, you are wrong. I'm going to say that as many times as possible because you were the most right about the most important thing this offseason. And last but not least, from my 2 cents, I'm a diehard Knicks fan, but I have a team signed ball from the late 80s bad boy squad that I love. We revere the Knicks of the 90s that were built in an identity similar to the bad boys, the tough rebounds, the no layups, the real gritty teams that, every team hated to play because you were going to be, feeling it the next morning. And I think some of that last year with the grittiness of that Knicks team, that it was just, in the spirit of the 90s Knicks who were in the spirit of the bad boys. I mean, kind of a softball question here, but just how much do you still? Just how much do Pistons fans still like reminisce from time to time? Like who comes back to Detroit every now and then? You know,
a lot of them do. Like Rick Mahorn is, with the radio crew, so he's always around. And like Isaiah Thomas, you'll still see him around here and there. I've only seen Bill Laimbeer once. They had a ceremony for those guys, and he was here for that a year or two ago. But absolutely, Rick Mahorn, you see him every night. Isaiah sticks around, and I mean the Bad Boys are just royalty,
right?
In Detroit, like there's a lot of people here who like they watched every game of the Bad Boys. They watched every game of the Going to Work team. Like couldn't tell you who's played for the team in the last 10 years because they just haven't had anything of like quite that level. But I could be talking to anybody about anyone, and it's a very deeply ingrained fandom. Like if you're ranking just the most iconic teams in Detroit, period, I mean the Bad Boys are, if they're not number one, I mean they're definitely top three. So
two things. One, it must feel weird for you when Isaiah Thomas means something completely different to me.
That is true. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
As a former Public,
it's like, he's probably not royalty in New York.
Not at all. Public enemy number 1, 2, and 3 for what we experienced in the mid 2000s. But also like it's why, and I told you this a little before the pod. And shout out to James Edwards III, who's the new Knicks beat writer from Detroit, and he and I over building our new friendship have bonded over the Lions. And listen, the reason those Bad Boys are so awesome and so revered is because they won, and they have 2 championships and 2 banners that they can look at. Lions win a Super Bowl, I think there'll be competition for the Bad Boys. Let me rephrase that. Our Lions win the Super Bowl, because I've 100% jumped on the bandwagon after years of mistreatment by the New York Jets. I
shout
mean,
out to James, by the way. That's my guy. I saw him rocking the Lions gear in New York yesterday.
Every time Thursday night I texted him, our Lions, and he just texted back, our Lions, There
you go. And that's true, because I don't know in my lifetime, like again, I'm 30, the Lions did not win their first playoff game in my lifetime until last season.
Last year.
Like I lived through Barry, but like I don't know if there's ever been like an iconic Lions team, like everybody's gonna collectively reminisce on like this one team. Like
it's
this
been
is
iconic
the first
players.
Time.
Iconic players. It's Barry, you got Megatron.
Exactly.
Like you have these special players that come through, and you're surprised that they didn't win more. Like even Matthew Stafford to an extent, and like the Tigers, I'd be curious your perspective. Like they've just had so much talent come through there and run into like teams that it was just like Team of Destiny stuff. Like beating losing to the Giants in the World Series. That just, they had so much more talent than the Giants, but the Giants just, again, Team of Destiny. The Red Sox that beat them in 2013, that Tigers pitching staff is like one of the best ever, like 4 Cy Young winners on it, and still like lost to a Red Sox team with a bunch of dudes that didn't shave for a month. That's just the weirdness of baseball. But I'm obviously rooting for your Lions this season, as I again have jumped on the bandwagon, and that's the most rooting for Detroit I will do, especially when it comes to this matchup against the New York Knicks. Before you get out of here, if I could ask some like X's and O's questions, because I always forget to do this. I want to make sure. Are they more of a switching team on defense, or they play a little bit of drop coverage?
A little bit of both, kind of like scheme dependent. They'll definitely switch with like they don't mind switching of like Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren, but they'll absolutely put those guys in drop, like depending on the matchup. Like I doubt they'll play in drop tonight because of Karl Anthony Towns, but also they've also just done a horrible job of like switching onto bigs who are getting open either on pops or like whatever it may be. They just have not been able to locate shooters, and Brook Lopez is going off against them. Like Karl Anthony Towns is, he's probably salivating right now, just with all the open threes they're giving up to bigs. So, I'm curious to see what adjustments they make tonight, because it's not going to be a drop night tonight, obviously, but they haven't been switching that well when it comes to the actual 5. So they got to figure something out there.
Do you think they start off with Duren on Cat, or do they put like a wing or a guard? That's what an adjustment we've seen recently, is that teams will switch more and like put a center on Josh Hart and kind of sag off him. He's made them pay over the last 2 games. Josh Hart shooting 41% from 3 on the season so far, which is like that. It's a game changer if Josh Hart's doing that. He's He's shooting 71% from 2. He's got like a 67. He's got like a Jokic effective field goal percentage with not Jokic impact, just effective field goal percentage.
Yeah.
But we've seen that the where the Knicks have struggles against teams that switch and choose not to put a center on Cat, and then the Knicks have to make them pay otherwise. So do you think like maybe they put Cade or like Tobias Harris? I mean, that's barbecue chicken if he puts it, but then you're no longer dealing with Jalen Brunson, and you're just, I don't know, like who do you think guards Jalen, or who do you think guards Karl Anthony Towns if they go to that type of defense?
Yeah, I think they start off with Duren on Karl Anthony Towns. Like, I think he'll just get the first crack. He can move well enough to do it. I think it's just more so the execution and awareness aspect of it. If you're going to adjust, then Tobias is probably the only guy in that starting lineup who has the size to, like, I don't want to say bother, but, at least put a hand up and, have it be within the vicinity of Karl Anthony Towns' release.
Be physical. Like the examples we've seen are like Dylan Brooks or Drew Holiday again guarding Cat. And it's like those big physical, all defense wings that could potentially give him trouble,
Right. Yeah. No one to save Duren from foul trouble. So, I think like I could see Tobias picking that up as the game goes on. For Brunson, they've been having Jaden Ivey play like pickup guards full court. I think they'll put him on Brunson to start, try to save Cade. Cade will have his opportunities. Just, I think with Cade's size, you have to give him a shot and just trust that he won't pick up fouls. And Asar, if he goes tonight, I believe Asar will probably get the brunt of the Brunson minutes defensively once he's on the floor. And he's definitely the best option they have on the roster to actually defend Jalen Brunson. So they're going to miss him tonight if he doesn't play.
Yeah, that's a Spoelstra wrinkle that came 2 years ago in the playoffs where he had Gabe Vincent and Max Strus and Caleb Martin picking up Brunson full court.
Yeah.
And teams have just been doing it ever since. And the Knicks had like get over half court at 16 on the shot clock. And it's like, you have like 4 seconds to get into your action. And so that's where they've added a wrinkle this year, an adjustment to the full court pressure where they'll set it. Either Josh Hart will walk up or whoever inbounds the ball to Brunson will walk up with him and kind of set a moving screen as he's going up the court, but basically making it so that way you can't full court pressure him, or they'll have a center come up at half court and set a screen. Like Jericho Sims has been obliterating human beings with these screens at half court.
Those are always fun. I feel like we used to get more of those, just like half court, just like crushing screens.
Then the flopping era that we entered into, that became a flagrant foul all of a sudden because you're getting someone blindsided.
And guys would knock over like bowling pins. Like
it would literally go like right into a wall like a cartoon and like slide down. So, regardless, I'm curious to see what this young Pistons team that look, like we said, they're on track for like 30 some odd wins, which would be a vast improvement. We'll see if they can give the Knicks a game tonight at the Garden. Omari, thank you so much for joining me for this edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. Before you get out of here, please let the fine folks at home know where they can find you and all of your work.
Yeah, as you always, a pleasure for having me. You could follow me on X and Blue Sky at Omari Sankofa, just my last name. Should be only one on both those apps with that name. So if you see me on there, it's me. And you can find my work at the Detroit Free Press. That's freep.com. And then me and Bryce Simon, Motor City Hoops, I have the Pistons Pulse, which posts every week, usually sometime between Monday and Wednesday. So you could go follow us over there as well. And we record live on YouTube, and we're also on Apple Music and Spotify.
Yep. All the links hyperlinked in the description of this episode. Obviously, Bryce, a friend of the pod, a bit of a colleague of mine over at Game Theory as well. I also mean this sincerely. Go Lions. And, hopefully, next time we're on here talking together, it's after a Super Bowl title. Omari, thank you so much for joining me. I would say enjoy the game tonight, but I hope it's a miserable experience watching the Pistons against the Knicks, of course. But thank you so much, as always, for joining me. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in for another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. If you dug it, please head over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. If you are watching, please like the video. Remember to subscribe. It really helps us out. I will be back on Monday to preview the Knicks matchup against the Toronto Raptors. But until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game tonight, and I will speak with you soon. Peace.